Welcome to Voice of Context. I'm your host, Diane Ding. Previously, I'm a VC, have experience in both Silicon Valley and China. Now I'm running China's top business podcast network.
Hello, I'm Aaron. I have 14 years of experience in China Asia market.
How are you doing? How are you doing in Hong Kong? Still warm. I'm so cold in here in Beijing.
Yeah, I can say that. It's getting colder and colder.
Yeah, but it's still warm, nice weather in Hong Kong. So today's episode, we want to talk about something I would say remarkable and historically rare. It just happened in Netherlands a couple weeks ago.
The Dutch government used a Cold War-era act to take control of Nexperia and oust its Chinese CEO.
The Dutch government used national security law that hadn't been used for nearly 17 years. I think it's the first time they're using it to force a change in control at Nexperia, a semiconductor company owned by a Chinese firm called Wingtech. So instead of requesting a sale, the government effectively stripped the control from the Chinese founder, which is such a big debate in China. But I don't really hear a lot of voices from outside of China. I know Aaron visited Wingtech back in 2019-ish when the company just acquired Nexperia and a lot of investor confidence. You were actually go into their company, right? Called their headquarters.
Yeah, actually, I'm quite familiar with that company. It was dating back 6 or 7 years ago. So first of all, let me show you a chart.
All right.
Please take a look at the red circle. During that period of time, the stock prices of Wingtech actually doubles, triples, or quadruples.
I think it's probably quadrupled or even
even more. That was the time when Wingtech acquires the Netherlands company called Nexperia.
That really gave them a big jump, the international story.
Yes. I can still remember the atmosphere. At that time, Wingtech was the star of Chinese semiconductor sector. However, we didn't invest in the company because at that time when I went to the company, the stock prices was already at its very peak level. So I was thinking that maybe we should wait and see because Wingtech was trying to do something a Chinese company have never done before, which is try to acquire a European company in a very strategical sector called semiconductor. And no one has ever done that before. And if we go back to the share price, then, well, it's quite obvious if we look backwards, there was something going wrong. And the stock price actually gradually went down until recently. So let me get straight to the point. I think this is a turning point for Chinese companies who are expanding globally. By turning point, I mean it's the complete collapse of phase one for Chinese tech companies who want to go global. As you know, in phase one, the main path is through M&A, mergers and acquisition, where you buy a foreign company and then you use the foreign company to boost your own innovation back home. We used to believe in strategic synergy. However, this path is dead. And now it's the start of the phase two, which means we have to innovate at home first and then going global by building a completely separate supply chain. So this is the start of the phase two.
So maybe one step back, let's talk about what Wingtech actually's main business are. So they are typical ODM, I'm sure everyone familiar with this term. They're not just.
I think you should explain a little bit.
They're not just a contract manufacturer. They are a design manufacturer. Basically, they can also help you to design hardware products. So their clients, including Xiaomi, including Huawei, and Samsung product. I think. Interestingly, I think around that time, 2017, 2018. In Silicon Valley, I was working for a similar company. They're also a listed Chinese manufacturer. And their approach is not just acquiring overseas company like Wingtech. They wanted to invest in Silicon Valley startups. Okay. So I was heading off their investments efforts. They're already pretty confident in the domestic market and they're really ambitious to go global.
Yes, dating back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, Wingtech was the ODM, which is called Original Design Manufacturer. If you take a look at its business model at that time, it was a very low value content business model. It just produced cell phones for Xiaomi and Huawei and companies like that. So after 2017, Wingtech decided to change its business model from ODM to IDM. They are very different in terms of their business model. And how could Wingtech achieve that? Well, you can guess they achieved that by acquiring a new company, Nexperia in Netherlands.
That's what everyone else is doing globally, right? You just buy companies, become global corporations. That's
Yes.
just a standard playbook. The acquisition happened in 2019, so it was originally the discrete and logic division of NXP, which is spun out of Philips. So their
Many
chip
years
is,
ago.
Yeah, their chip is not like cutting edge chips, not like AI chips these days, and everyone's like so crazy about. They only make the essential chips like semiconductor stuff, like a power semiconductor, transistor, old school things. You find them in cars, energy system, chargers, where reliability matters more than performance. So they're low profile, but they're deeply embedded in supply chains.
Before Wingtech actually acquired Nexperia, another Chinese consortium has already acquired a major share of Nexperia. So you can put it this way. Even before Wingtech, the company Nexperia are already controlled by Chinese consortium already. And the total cost of the deal is about 34 billion RMBs, which is a very huge acquisition at that time. Okay, so after buying Nexperia, Wingtech becomes the leading global IDM, as Diane mentioned. The product of Nexperia are used almost everywhere, in automotive, in industry, in mobile, and also in consumer sector. So let me give you some key data. The automotive industry is Nexperia's biggest source of income. For the full year of 2023, the automotive business accounts for around 62% of its revenue of Nexperia. And that is why Nexperia is considered to be a very important, crucial player in the automotive industry for the European car makers.
Yeah, maybe that's why Dutch government are trying to take back the control over, because the automotive industry is crucial. Also, they're actually saying the Wingtech is asking Nexperia to sell it to Russian car companies. So that is one of their evidence for national security threats.
Yeah. Okay, I think nothing like this just happens overnight. It has been brewing for a very long time, and then suddenly it all comes to the surface at once. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happens.
Yeah, before this big incident, I mean, back in July 2021, a couple years after Nexperia got acquired by Wingtech, so they were trying to acquire this UK wafer fab called Newport Wafer Fab in the UK. They're the largest semiconductor facility in South Wales. At that time, it didn't raise much public attention. By November 2022, after a national security review under the UK's National Security and Investment Act, the British government ordered Nexperia to divest its majority stake in NWF. Why? Because China-linked owner might pose a risk to UK's tech infrastructure and supply chain resilience. Basically the same thing what happened in 2022 November in UK. So a year later, this company called Vishay Intertechnology, a US-based company, semiconductor company, announced it would acquire the fab from Nexperia for 177 million. And March 2024, the sales was finalized with full government approval. So you can see this is not the first time Nexperia has been encountered this kind of problem. This is not rare. Yeah. It's not high profile as TikTok got forced to divest in the US. Everyone used TikTok.
Yes.
It's a semiconductor company, and it doesn't raise a lot of attention.
We can briefly go over what is the conflict right now and what is the timeline, how it happens.
Right. I think it's just kind of like history repeat itself. It's very, very similar, but I wouldn't say it's perfect storm, but there are definitely something internal. So maybe we start with how this news break out. September 30th, 2025, the Dutch government invoked the Goods Provision Act of 1952, a law dormant for over 70 years, to freeze all major decision-making at Nexperia. And on October the 1st, 2025, a Dutch court suspended Nexperia chairman Zhang Xuezheng, is also the founder of Wingtech, citing a violation of shareholder governance agreement, attempting to dismiss of 3 Western board members, and conflict of interest tied to Winsky procurement deals, which been cited a lot by Western medias. Nexperia entered a controversial procurement deal with a related party, Wingsky Semiconductor, which is also owned by Zhang Xuezheng, raising internal governance concerns. A lot of Western media cited this as the major issue the Dutch government got involved. Now the control of Nexperia's voting right was transferred to an independent Dutch trustee.
And let's go back to the beginning. Why did Wingtech acquire Nexperia? What was its purpose at that time? Well, the first purpose is to transform its business model from ODM to IDM, which is from low value to high value. That's first the purpose. However, there was a second purpose, and that purpose is we call it strategical synergy. I mean, in the conception of the Chinese company, that means we want to learn, we want to acquire technology from European companies or from US companies, and we want to use that technology back home. So after the acquisition of Nexperia, Wingtech tries to build another subsidiary, which is a chip manufacturing companies back home in China, using some of the technologies from Nexperia. So that is the controversial part, and that is also what Diane mentioned previously as related party transaction. As it initially planned, once the construction of Wingsky Semi finished, almost 17% of all the manufacturing capacity would be transferred from Netherlands to China. So by transfer the capacity to China, Wingtech can actually save a lot of cost. That was the initial plan. But however, after the rule of the Netherlands court, right now Wingtech can no longer do business both with Nexperia and Wingsky Semi.
So Aaron, so from your perspective, after you have done so many researches with public company, is this a related party transaction per se, or this is more like an excuse from Dutch court?
Well, of course, this is a very typical related party transaction. But there's nothing wrong about related party transaction.
But does it break the law?
Well, I think there's a gap between our understanding. So if you take a look at the related party transaction in China A-share market, I think it's more common than what you can see in the US or in European market. Well, in China's A-share market, the rules focus on procedures. Okay, let's be clear. They focus on procedures, and you have to disclose the deal, and then related party has to step out of the room during the vote. That is the right procedure. And once the procedure is finished, then we can carry on with the related party transaction. That is fine. But if you look at the EU rule, which is a little bit different from the Chinese A-share rule, well, in the EU, the shareholder rights directive are much stricter. Okay, they don't just require disclosure. They also require, let's say, a fairness opinion from an independent third party. Mm-hmm. And also, the deal must be approved by a non-related shareholders. Okay, which means the controlling shareholders actually have very limited options to push it through. But in China A-shares, they don't have the right to vote, but they can actually influence the procedure of the vote to get what they want eventually. So from Zhang Xuezheng's perspective, who is the shareholders of Wingtech and Nexperia, using Nexperia to help his another company, which we just mentioned, called Wingsky Semi, was probably just strategic synergy. It's quite understandable. But according to the Dutch legal officer in the court, this was a very classic conflict of interest. So then it gave them the perfect legal jurisdictions for mismanagement. I just quote from the court rule. They call it mismanagement.
Is it just the geopolitics on top of like ignorance of the EU law system and then just made it into a perfect storm?
Let me try to be clear that there's a difference in terms of the understanding of mismanagement or related party transaction.
Right.
As we mentioned, in China, it's all about procedure. If the procedure is justified, then the outcome is justified. So if you take a look at the conflict, the nature of the whole conflict, I would say it's more like a political bargain. So mismanagement was the legal pretext, but weaponized justice was the real motive. And it was both. But there's a difference in terms of the level. So as we discussed, the mismanagement, because there's a massive gap in corporate governance cultures. Zhang Xuezheng's related party deals did legally constitute mismanagement in the Dutch court, but it was a legal pretext. And we look at weaponized justice. I think that was the real motive. Let's be real. If it were not for geopolitics, this kind of dispute could be settled by the board of directors, right? It would never escalate to the state of using
international affair.
Right. You don't have to do that. As you mentioned in the very beginning, the Dutch court actually using our Cold War era emergency law, and that law has literally never been used after the Cold War
at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Let me put it straight. The primary goal of the Dutch government was to de-risk Nexperia's control before the U.S. sanctions kick in. We can discuss what was the U.S. sanctions later on.
So let me put it simply this way. So if no such related party transaction happen, there will be some other things happen in a company that will cite this law.
I think you are right.
Back in September 2024, the U.S. Department of Commerce added Wingtech to its entity list. If you don't familiar with entity list, so it's like a technology blacklist. Once listed, the company must obtain a license to purchase U.S. critical technologies. Yeah. But these licenses are often denied. So Wingtech was on it since last September. I think this time after this incident breakout, and China's commercial department and all the government media are saying this is the Dutch government under U.S.'s pressure. It's nothing else. This is what the Chinese media and the government official says.
That's one side of the story. Let's remember there's a very important conception called extraterritorial trap of the U.S. And I think that's also the real motive behind the thing. That was the Dutch action was really, a defensive move. And it was made under the pressure from the U.S. If you remember, back last year, 2024, in December, Wingtech was added to the U.S. entity list, as Diane mentioned. So for the entity list, there's just something very serious. It's called penetration rule, right? Penetration rule. What is penetration rule? The rule expanded export control to any subsidiaries that is more than 50% owned by the listed entity. Then the subsidiary would be penetrated. It would also be considered in the entity list. Okay, just in that way, Nexperia, as we mentioned, was a wholly owned subsidiaries of Wingtech. And if Wingtech is in entity list, then Nexperia should be put in the entity list as well, right? So you have to prove that Nexperia is free of Chinese control.
I mean, why? Because this is a Chinese investor pay for it and then has been running it and then make the company profitable. I think they actually turn a profit since they acquire Nexperia.
That's the funny part. If the Dutch government or the Dutch management team can prove that Nexperia is free of the Chinese control, then there might be able to be exempt from the U.S. entity list rule. How do you prove that, right? Your shares are owned by Wingtech. There's only one thing you can do. You have to prove that the whole management team is free of control of the Wingtech.
It feels like it's the exact story at a TikTok, and the U.S. government asked TikTok to be sold to a U.S. company.
Actually, no. In the story of the TikTok, it might be a little bit different because the U.S. government wants ByteDance to sell the majority of its shares in TikTok.
I mean, in the first phase, they want TikTok to use U.S. cloud infrastructure, to have U.S.-based governance, everything. And then the CEO, again, he's been saying that he's Singaporean. And then the U.S. politicians keep asking, isn't Singapore is part of China? Which is
my God. Okay, Diane, you just mentioned something very, very important. You mentioned that's phase one.
Right,
so
that's phase one.
Right now, we know the story of TikTok. There was phase one, and there was phase two after phase one's requirement were all met. So let's go back to the case of Nexperia. And I firmly believe there will be phase two. And now we are in phase one. Okay, and since we are in phase one, let's focus on phase one. What was the demand from phase one? It has to prove that the company was free of the Chinese control. So something very interesting happened. They deprived the voting rights from existing shareholders. And that was something I've never heard before. If you are shareholders, then absolutely you should have the rights to control the board of directors.
Right, it's a wholly owned subsidiary. It's not like they just part investor.
Yeah, especially it was the wholly owned subsidiaries. So in the case of Nexperia, the Dutch government cannot force Wingtech to sell its shares at this stage. So theoretically, Wingtech still holds 99% of the shares. The Dutch government actually deprived Wingtech from placing any influence on the Nexperia's management in Netherlands.
Yeah, they strip all the power, voting power from Zhou.
Okay, quote, the Dutch government frees Nexperia's asset, IP, business operations, and personnel changes for 1 year, which means even Wingtech was still the major shareholders, it has no influence in its business operations and the personnel changes for the next year to come.
Do you have any information that who's actually managing the company? They're all Dutch people, or there are some Chinese management roles there other than Zhang?
Good question. Actually, the management of Nexperia consist of Dutch citizen and German citizen instead of Chinese. Well, there are a bunch of Chinese management in Netherlands, but it does not consist of the major part of the management team. And also, the CEO is Zhang Xuezhen, so
right.
He stays in China right now. After the whole conflict, the whole management of Nexperia was theoretically independent from the influence of Zhang Xuezhen.
How does the China investor view this? How's their stock price going?
Well, this is a very fun fact. Let me share with you another chart. This is the stock price of Wingtech. And as you can see, there's a red square. That was the period of time when the Dutch government actually intervened with the conflict and the stock prices dropped dramatically. But however, after like 3 to 4 trading days, the stock prices rebound. So here's what I want to say.
Right.
Even though the situation become worse than any of us have ever expected, the stock market has already expected.
So people are not surprised by this geopolitics conflicts at all. Maybe initially just as a shock when the news break out, and then they're like, okay. That's
what we expected. Let's go back to another chart, the previous chart of the stock price. After the acquisition of Nexperia, the stock price of Wingtech reached its peak like 6 years ago. And after that peak, the stock prices of Wingtech declined dramatically for over a very long period of 5 years.
Right.
And if you take a look at what happened in semiconductor this year, well, that is a boom market for semiconductor. Almost every single stock I know in China Asia market doubled, tripled during this period of time. But if you take a look at Wingtech, well, the stock price is still like, laying back and seems like nothing can move it. Yeah. So that is the interesting part. The stock market has already sensed something has already went wrong.
Give us the suspense. Just tell us what's your view.
Well, look at the chart. Nothing happens in decades. And then all of a sudden, decades happen in days. So I would say after the peak of the stock price, the market was thinking about two issues. The first issue is, would it be so easy for a Chinese company to acquire a European company? Is it a very good opportunity or is it a trap? At that time, nobody knows the answer. So that was the question we bear in mind after the acquisition. And the second one is, would we actually have the strategic synergy as we hoped for by acquiring a foreign company? That was question 2. And now we have the answer for both of the questions. The answer was no. We don't have that. But during that period of time, during the past 5 years, the market has been asking the question again and again. That is why there feels like a very huge pressure upon the stock price of Wingtech. Even though its competitors, its peers, actually double their stock price. But Wingtech stay there all the time.
Let me give you a little bit about this, my take in the private sector, not a public company. So I think that's kind of it's like the watershed moment since 2018. I'm sure you're familiar with CFIUS review. Like basically it's related to the U.S. National security. But in the 2018, since the passage of FIRMA, FIRMA, the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act. So the landscape of cross-border investment has fundamentally changed. I have really first-hand experience during that time. I think beginning of 2012-ish, there's a lot of Chinese money coming to Silicon Valley, invest. There are a lot of Chinese funds. They want to get involved. And all the companies, startup, they welcome them. They welcome the Chinese money. They welcome the China's collaboration and the market growth opportunity. But since 2018, everything changed. All the Chinese investors I know left U.S., left Silicon Valley. So that's
I think it's still true. They left China. They flew somewhere else.
It's totally decoupled. I think the little drop, I think also within that kind of time frame, it's not just the secondary market, it's also the private sector also.
That actually illustrates one point. The old model of globalization, or we call it capacity allocation, right? It's based on efficiency, which means the capital flow to the cheapest, the most efficient place, like European design and Asia manufacturing, which is actually the case of Nexperia. That was the old model of globalization. But this conflict proved that a highly integrated global companies, such as Nexperia, they can be torn apart instantly by geopolitical games. And with both sides trying to use their piece of the supply chain as a leverage. And as a result, the old paradigm, was dead already. And now we are entering a new phase of, regional strategy. I think it's the end of the phase 1 and the beginning of the phase 2. But however, there's a transition period. And during this transition period, we actually hurt each other. Or let me put it another way, there is a mutually assured disruption. And why is that? Let's look at the irony side of the story. The original purpose of the Dutch government was to intervene in order to secure Europeans' cheap supply. But the action is exactly what caused the supply chain to break immediately. If you take a look at China's countermoves, after the Dutch government rules in October, the China's Ministry of Commerce hit back immediately. They banned Nexperia's factories in China from exporting specific finished components back to Europe. So this is what we call mutually assured disruptions. Okay, even though the Netherlands sees the brain part, which is the factories and also the IP, but the China controls the hands, which means the testing and the packaging part of the chip manufacturer. So China's export ban immediately caused a crisis for automotive producers in Europe, such as Volkswagen's BMW. So neither side can use the full value of this asset alone. We have Nexperia placing here, nothing changed. But the only result is that they have both managed to destroy the company's global competitiveness. Nobody wins. This is a very painful transition period.
Yeah, I mean, this story happened before when the Apple supply chain experienced basically the same thing. I heard from my friends from Apple, and they were like really working so hard and try to recreate their new supply chain after the decoupling.
I think they are moving from China to India.
Right. So this is just in the process of more breakdown the globalization world.
I think the new paradigm is regionalization instead of globalization.
This is the breakdown of the old world orders. But as we mentioned in the last episode, the Cambricon story, so there is force and there's like force that come back at it. Like Cambricon is the perfect example, and that company like Cambricon force grow into this giant that can just be the replacement of NVIDIA in China. And then we're talking for the whole episode this time, and there's probably no more globalization and just regionalization for the years to come.
It's a sad story. Chinese companies can no longer pretend it's just business. So by just doing business is not enough to avoid regulations. And Chinese companies can no longer assure that they are safe just by following local business laws. I think that is the primary lesson we have to learn from this case. Yeah, so if we have to give a concluding remarks, first of all, the old path is dead. So we have to find another way for globalization, or more accurately, find a new way for regionalization. And secondly, Chinese companies have to get involved in politicals and have to learn their rules and use their rules. We cannot avoid that anymore.
I kind of doubt that if we... So if you pull the national security, if you pull this kind of like what the Dutch court pulled, this like they never used this act ever. Yeah. So this is not fair anymore. This is not like a fair trade anymore.
Well, it's not a fair playground from the beginning.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
my
So-
territory. You play by my rules. If I don't like you, you cannot play in my territory. This is simply
Yeah.
as that. It's a tribalism.
From my previous observations, for a very, very long time,
Mm-hmm.
Chinese companies actually stay away from politicals. And that has become the way we do business. Well, if you want to do globalization, and if you truly want to get involved in their local business, you have to involved in their politicals.
Aaron, thank you for the detailed explanation and analysis for today. I don't know, it's kind of like a sad ending that I'm sensing here. If you like this episode, please let us know, and then we'll keep following this Nexperia news. I think there's going to be a very important conference with President Trump and Chairman Xi. So we'll see what's going on after that.
See you next time.